The morning that would change the 21st century began long before the smoke rose over New York. Years earlier, inside a maze of offices and servers scattered between Langley and Washington, fragments of intelligence had started to surface. Small warnings, stray intercepts, men's names whispered in the margins of classified cables. But those fragments never connected. Somewhere between bureaucracy and disbelief, history slipped through the cracks. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe stories like this need to be told with truth and balance, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. In the mid-1990s, the CIA was deeply engaged in chasing the aftershocks of earlier conflicts, the remnants of Cold War networks, shifting alliances across the Middle East, and the emerging threat of stateless militant groups. Amid that chaos, a new name began surfacing: Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi exile who had transformed from a former ally during the Afghan War to the financier of radical training camps stretching from Sudan to Afghanistan. Early field officers gathered scattered intelligence suggesting that his network was no longer confined to regional targets. By 1996, internal assessments described a global infrastructure with financial arms, travel facilitators, and recruits moving under false identities. It was information passed from one analyst's desk to another, rarely prioritized, sometimes lost inside interagency rivalry. While the CIA maintained surveillance through its counterterrorism center, the agency's limited resources and the evolving nature of the threat created blind spots. Files marked urgent were sometimes downgraded because they lacked precise geographic focus. Meanwhile, field agents in Yemen, Pakistan, and East Africa reported meetings between men who appeared to be preparing for something far larger than local attacks. Then came August 1998. The bombings of the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. Over 200 people killed. For the first time, intelligence communities recognized the sophistication of this network. Bin Laden's name was formally elevated to top priority target. But the shock of the attack soon faded into the political noise of Washington, where multiple agencies, CIA, NSA, FBI, fought over jurisdiction, methods, and credit. Throughout 1999, U.S. intelligence picked up increasing chatter about a major operation being planned. Electronic intercepts and travel patterns hinted at something involving airplanes. Agents in Southeast Asia and Europe tracked suspected militants attending flight schools, purchasing equipment, and discussing American symbols. Still, the pieces never fused. One of the most critical failures lay in communication. The CIA had information on two men later identified as future hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who had entered the United States months before the attacks. That intelligence, however, never reached the FBI's domestic counter-terror team in time. An internal memo later revealed that analysts had flagged their names, but the cable got lost in translation, literally, as it moved between different encrypted communication systems. Inside the intelligence community, frustration was mounting. Some officers warned that bureaucracy was becoming a greater enemy than the militants themselves. After the millennium failed to bring the predicted wave of attacks, focus drifted toward new geopolitical priorities: cybersecurity, Russian espionage, and regional diplomacy. The warnings continued, but urgency waned. In early 2001, a classified brief circulated among senior officials. It stated that Al-Qaeda was preparing a spectacular operation. But without exact timing or location, such memos were often viewed as routine. One of the most haunting sentences written that year appeared in a memo titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." The report outlined potential hijack scenarios, but decision-makers assumed they referred to overseas embassies or military assets, not domestic targets. That spring, multiple foreign intelligence services quietly sent alerts to Washington. Each spoke of unusual travel patterns by Middle Eastern men, sudden financial transfers, and coded messages about aviation. Yet the system was saturated. Every department received hundreds of similar reports weekly. Most led nowhere. This time, however, they were pieces of the same puzzle. Meanwhile, within the CIA's analytical wing, there was growing tension between field realism and political caution. Some analysts argued that they needed to act preemptively. Others feared the lack of solid evidence would create diplomatic fallout. Meetings were held, reports drafted, but no direct action was authorized. On the other side of the bureaucratic divide, the FBI had domestic field offices chasing clues of their own. Student pilots asking odd questions, suspicious financial movements, flight simulators being booked at odd hours. But the FBI and CIA shared information through separate systems, each guarded by internal firewalls meant to protect classified data. Those digital walls proved as fatal as concrete ones. By summer 2001, the pattern was undeniable to a few within the system. Some officers pleaded for an emergency interagency task force, but the threat assessments circulating daily were still filled with uncertainty, the kind that paralyzes action. The atmosphere inside intelligence offices was described later as one of anticipation without clarity. Behind the desks and screens, individuals worked tirelessly, translating intercepted calls, cross-checking flight manifests, examining satellite images. Many of them would later describe the same feeling. They knew something catastrophic was coming, but no one knew how to stop it. When the attacks finally happened on September 11, 2001, the question wasn't only how it happened, but why so many had seen it coming. The post-attack investigations uncovered a devastating reality. At least 23 separate warnings from both foreign and domestic sources had reached the United States before the attacks. Most were either delayed, misinterpreted, or filed away. After the tragedy, congressional inquiries and independent commissions revealed a systemic collapse in intelligence sharing. The CIA's post-incident introspection would describe it not as a failure of knowledge, but a failure of imagination. They had the facts. They just didn't believe such an audacious act was possible. Within months, sweeping reforms reshaped the entire U.S. intelligence architecture. Creation of the Department of Homeland Security, new protocols for interagency cooperation, and expansion of surveillance powers. But those changes came too late for the thousands lost. What makes this episode haunting isn't just the magnitude of the event, it's the proof that modern intelligence, for all its satellites and secrecy, can still be blinded by human assumptions. Warnings were there. Signals were flashing. Yet, trapped inside layers of hierarchy and disbelief, the system stood still while history accelerated. In the aftermath of the attacks, while rescue workers dug through the ruins and the world struggled to process the unthinkable, a different kind of fire ignited inside the walls of Washington. It wasn't a war fought with weapons, but with memos, hearings, and accusations. The intelligence agencies that had long prided themselves on foresight were now under siege for failing to stop the worst attack in modern U.S. history. Inside Langley, the CIA's headquarters in Virginia, senior officers gathered in tense silence. Some of them had spent years tracking al-Qaeda. Others had dismissed the group as little more than an extremist fringe. Now, as news channels replayed the footage of collapsing towers, a single question echoed through the corridors. How did we miss this? The earliest hours after the attack saw confusion turn to defensiveness. Each agency, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and even the Pentagon's intelligence branches, began quietly compiling internal timelines to prove they had done their part. What emerged wasn't one grand failure, but a constellation of smaller, overlapping ones. each magnified by bureaucracy, secrecy, and distrust. The CIA had long believed that terrorism was best fought overseas, at the source. Their operations were built around foreign surveillance, informant networks, and human intelligence. The FBI, in contrast, was focused on domestic crime and counter-espionage. Despite decades of attempts to bridge the gap, the two agencies remained culturally and technically divided. Their computer systems were incompatible. Their analysts didn't share data in real time. Even their definitions of what constituted a terrorist threat weren't aligned. By September 12, 2001, the race to assign blame had begun in earnest. A classified meeting between the CIA and FBI quickly turned tense. Documents show that senior officials from both sides argued over who had failed to track the two hijackers who entered the United States months before the attack. The CIA insisted that it had flagged them. The FBI countered that no actionable information was ever passed along. What complicated matters further was the growing political pressure from above. Lawmakers demanded answers, the media demanded accountability, and the public demanded justice. But the truth, buried in thousands of pages of classified cables, misfiled memos, and digital logs, wasn't easy to summarize. It was a systemic failure, not a singular one. Within weeks, the 9/11 Commission was established to investigate the chain of events. Behind closed doors, intelligence veterans testified about an environment where critical warnings were lost to what one analyst called institutional deafness. Reports surfaced of internal alerts written months before the attack, explicitly mentioning the possibility of hijackings. Some agents even recalled being told not to pursue certain leads to avoid overstepping jurisdiction. One of the most haunting findings came from a review of intercepted communications in the summer of 2001. Multiple foreign services had provided fragments, warnings of an imminent strike involving airplanes. The information reached various American agencies, but was never unified. Analysts compared it to having a dozen puzzle pieces, but each locked in a different drawer. In one internal CIA review, a veteran field officer admitted that the agency had become too reliant on data and not enough on instinct. Years of focusing on electronic intelligence, intercepted calls, satellite images, and digital patterns had weakened the agency's human networks. The kind of ground-level informants who could confirm the scale or timing of an attack were becoming rare. When Al-Qaeda shifted its core operations to Afghanistan, those informant lines went cold. Meanwhile, the political environment after 9/11 accelerated the need for answers. The U.S. government launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, aiming to dismantle Al-Qaeda's stronghold. The CIA's Special Activities Division was among the first to enter Afghan territory, working alongside local militias. Publicly, the agency was praised for its rapid deployment. Privately, it was scrutinized for the years of misjudgment that made such an invasion necessary. Inside Washington, committees formed overnight. Reports were written faster than they could be verified. Some officials argued that the real problem wasn't lack of intelligence, it was lack of coordination. Others pointed to deeper flaws: outdated technology, internal politics, and a reluctance to challenge assumptions. One particularly revealing document from late 2001 described a pattern of institutional confirmation bias. Analysts who questioned the dominant view that large-scale attacks on U.S. soil were improbable found their concerns buried or ignored. Dissent wasn't encouraged, it was quietly sidelined. In one testimony, an analyst recalled saying months before the attack, "If we don't move faster, something catastrophic is going to happen here." His memo never left the building. As investigations expanded, the media unearthed more inconsistencies. Some officials had reportedly attended meetings discussing al-Qaeda's intent to hijack commercial aircraft. Yet, those warnings were treated as speculative rather than actionable. When confronted, many claimed they simply didn't believe such a plan was feasible. The failure, it turned out, was partly psychological. A refusal to imagine that a small group could outthink a trillion-dollar defense machine. To the outside world, it appeared that America's most powerful intelligence network had been paralyzed by its own complexity. The CIA was filled with brilliant minds, but they were operating inside a structure built for the Cold War, not asymmetric threats. Intelligence gathering was precise, but analysis was fragmented. One unit tracked financial networks, another monitored communications, another handled visas and travel. Yet none had a unified dashboard. In one telling episode, after the attacks, investigators discovered that two critical reports, one from an FBI field office, another from the CIA, contained almost identical warnings about men connected to flight schools. Both were filed within days of each other. Neither side knew the other had written it. When the 9/11 Commission report was finally published in 2004, it confirmed what many insiders already knew. The system had all the information it needed, just not in one place. The report concluded, the most important failure was one of imagination. The phrase would become infamous, a symbolic summary of a nation blindsided by its own assumptions. Reform soon followed. The intelligence structure underwent its largest overhaul since World War II. The Director of National Intelligence (DNI) position was created to oversee all agencies under a single coordinating authority. Data sharing laws were rewritten. Information that once required layers of clearance began flowing between departments. The idea was to make sure no single warning could again go unheard. Yet inside the agencies, morale was fractured. Careers were destroyed. Some officers, consumed by guilt, resigned quietly. Others doubled down, determined to rebuild public trust. A quiet transformation began, not just in technology, but in mindset. The CIA, once defined by secrecy, began to acknowledge the need for collaboration, even with the same institutions it once viewed as rivals. Outside the intelligence world, academic and journalistic circles began to dissect what had happened. Many noted that the 9/11 failure wasn't unique. It reflected a global challenge. Modern intelligence, built for nation-to-nation espionage, was struggling to adapt to non-state actors who operated like shadows, decentralized, patient, and unpredictable. In the Middle East, some intelligence officials observed that the U.S. had underestimated the impact of its foreign policies, which had indirectly fueled resentment, exploited by extremist recruiters. Others argued that Washington's obsession with technological superiority blinded it to cultural and human factors on the ground. By 2003, new data mining programs and surveillance networks emerged. Artificial intelligence and digital tracking tools were introduced, allowing analysts to connect patterns faster than ever before. But even as technology advanced, some inside the agency warned that no algorithm could replace human judgment. The years following 9/11 would redefine global intelligence. From London to Islamabad, security services restructured themselves, creating fusion centers to break the silos between departments. Yet, the question remained, could these changes truly prevent the next catastrophe? Or were they simply new versions of old systems wearing modern clothes? As one retired CIA officer later put it, "We built walls to protect information. We didn't realize we were building them between ourselves." That single sentence summarized not just the tragedy of 9/11, but the psychology of modern intelligence, a realm where secrets are currency, and sometimes the price of keeping them is catastrophic. The dust from Ground Zero had barely settled when a second, quieter war began. A war fought not with armies, but with data, satellites, informants, and ideology. The attacks of September 11th didn't just bring down buildings, they shattered the illusion that intelligence agencies, no matter how advanced, were invincible. In capitals around the world, from London to Moscow, the first reaction was disbelief, followed by fear. Governments realized that the world's most powerful intelligence state had been blindsided. If the CIA could fail so catastrophically, what did that mean for everyone else? Within days, the phone lines between Washington and allied capitals were flooded. Emergency summits took place in hidden rooms. Intelligence chiefs from the UK, Israel, Pakistan, Egypt, and Europe flew in and out of Langley under secrecy. The world's spy network, normally competitive and divided by secrecy, was suddenly forced into an uneasy alliance, united by terror, but divided by trust. For Britain's MI6, 9/11 was a wake-up call of operational humility. Their intelligence officers had long viewed jihadist movements as primarily a Middle Eastern problem. Now, the threat had globalized. Within weeks, British counterterrorism units began combing through old files, tracing individuals who had once traveled through Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Yemen. Suddenly, casual intelligence reports that had gathered dust for years became top priority. Germany faced an even more uncomfortable revelation. Several of the hijackers had lived in Hamburg. The Hamburg cell became a haunting symbol of how European intelligence services, constrained by legal limitations on surveillance, had missed extremists operating in plain sight. Meanwhile, across the Middle East, intelligence services scrambled to understand what the New World Order meant for them. For countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, the attacks created both opportunity and danger. They possessed valuable human intelligence networks inside extremist organizations, but feared that the coming U.S. response would destabilize the region. Some cooperated discreetly with Washington. Others hesitated, fearing backlash from their own populations. In Israel, the Mossad conducted one of its largest intelligence analyses in years. For decades, its focus had been regional: Arab states, Palestinian factions, Iran, and Hezbollah. But 9/11 proved that transnational threats could move beyond traditional battlefields. Mossad began quietly sharing intelligence with its American counterparts at levels never seen before. Yet, beneath the cooperation lay quiet tension. Each agency determined to protect its own secrets, even from its closest ally. The attack triggered an unprecedented global surveillance revolution. The CIA, with new legal powers under the Patriot Act, began coordinating with the National Security Agency, NSA, to build vast digital monitoring systems. But the reach extended far beyond the United States. Across Europe, intelligence services built similar frameworks, data exchange programs, passenger tracking systems, and joint watch lists. In some countries, these operations blurred the line between security and privacy. The new mantra became, "Prevent first, explain later." In Pakistan, the Inter-Services Intelligence (ISI) agency found itself walking a tightrope. The U.S. needed Pakistan's cooperation to reach Afghanistan. At the same time, Islamabad feared losing control of its own intelligence assets, many of whom had historic links to Afghan militants. The ISI became both a partner and a problem for Washington. While some officers aided U.S. operations, others warned that the American presence could ignite long-term instability, a prediction that would prove accurate in the years ahead. In Iran, the attacks confirmed Tehran's long-standing suspicion that Western intelligence agencies were blind to non-state actors. While publicly condemning the attacks, Iranian intelligence, particularly the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, MOIS, began preparing for what they feared was coming next: U.S. military expansion in the region. They assumed Iran would eventually become a target. Their operatives in Iraq and Afghanistan began gathering intelligence on U.S. troop movements long before Washington officially turned its attention eastward. For Israel, 9/11 presented a strange paradox. Publicly, its leaders offered condolences and solidarity. Privately, Mossad analysts debated whether the attacks would shift America's strategic focus away from the Middle East peace process and toward global counterterrorism. In Tel Aviv, a classified assessment circulated through Mossad headquarters in 2002. It concluded that the U.S. would now see the world through the prism of terror, and that Israel's own intelligence infrastructure would have to adapt. Mossad's counter-terror division began sending liaison officers to Washington, sharing expertise in human intelligence, surveillance, and covert operations. But as cooperation deepened, disagreements surfaced. Mossad officers were accustomed to fast, unilateral action, not layers of legal oversight or political debate. The CIA, still reeling from criticism, was now obsessed with accountability and documentation. Their approaches clashed. In several cases, Israeli intelligence passed time-sensitive leads that got buried in bureaucratic review. Conversely, American officers accused Mossad of acting recklessly without coordination. The cooperation remained strong but fragile, a marriage of necessity, not trust. Back in Langley, the CIA itself was undergoing a metamorphosis. Entire divisions were reorganized. New recruitment drives began, focusing on Arabic and Pashto speakers. Drone programs that had once been experimental became central to U.S. counterterrorism. A new generation of field agents emerged, not Cold War spies in trench coats, but analysts with laptops, linguists, and cyber intelligence experts. The agency embraced data mining, AI-assisted pattern recognition, and digital espionage. One internal memo from that period captured the tension perfectly. We can see everything from space, but sometimes we can't see what's right in front of us. Europe, too, was quietly transforming. France strengthened its domestic intelligence agency, expanding surveillance laws. Germany passed legislation allowing deeper coordination between police and intelligence services. The UK created joint terrorism analysis centers, blending MI5 and MI6 data with real-time police intelligence. But the European approach also faced criticism. Civil liberty groups accused governments of overreach. Surveillance programs grew massive, yet the same question haunted every agency. Could they ever truly prevent another 9/11, or just react faster next time? In Eastern Europe, small nations that had once played limited roles in global espionage became quiet hubs for US and NATO operations. Secret detention sites, later exposed by journalists, appeared across several countries, allowing the CIA to interrogate suspects away from public scrutiny. These black sites became one of the most controversial legacies of the post-9/11 intelligence era. Supporters argued they were essential to saving lives. Critics called them a moral and strategic disaster. In time, even inside the CIA, opinions fractured. As the war on terror expanded into Iraq, a new rivalry emerged beneath the surface, between Western and Eastern intelligence ecosystems. Iran's MOIS, Russia's FSB, and China's MSS began studying American methods, not to copy them, but to counter them. Cyber warfare, disinformation, and proxy networks became their preferred tools. Intelligence officers from these nations quietly observed that the United States had become predictable, reactive rather than proactive. While Washington poured resources into hunting terrorists, other powers began playing longer games: cyber espionage, economic infiltration, and influence campaigns that would take years to mature. This marked the dawn of a new era of espionage, one defined less by geography and more by networks. Hackers replaced moles. Data replaced microfilm. A single USB drive could now do what once took a spy years to achieve. By the mid-2000s, nearly every major intelligence service on Earth had restructured around counterterrorism. Yet, the deeper transformation was psychological. The myth of intelligence perfection had been shattered. At closed-door conferences and academic think tanks, analysts began speaking a new language, one of interdependence. No single agency, however advanced, could see the full picture anymore. Threats were too fluid, actors too decentralized. In the Middle East, intelligence cooperation grew both intense and secretive. Regional rivals, sometimes enemies, exchanged select information when it served mutual interests. The same web of relationships that once fueled espionage now blurred into diplomacy. And in the middle of it all stood the lesson of 9/11, a permanent reminder that even the most powerful intelligence apparatus can fail when divided by ego, secrecy, and silence. The aftershocks of that day didn't just reshape intelligence, they rewired global power. From that moment onward, every intercepted call, every suspicious financial transaction, every drone strike, all traced their lineage back to that morning in 2001 when the towers fell. And the world's spy agencies realized they were no longer omniscient. 2 decades later, the shock of 9/11 still echoes through the world's intelligence corridors. Every file opened, every intercepted signal, every operation planned, carries the ghost of that morning. Inside Langley, a new generation of analysts now studies the failure not as a story of shame, but as a blueprint for change. The CIA that once relied on scattered reports and divided departments has evolved into an ecosystem built on fusion of data, human insight, and global cooperation. But the transformation came with a cost. In chasing security, nations traded fragments of their privacy. In hunting shadows, they sometimes created new ones. Drones replaced agents, algorithms replaced instinct, and yet, the core question remains: can intelligence ever truly prevent the next unknown? In Tel Aviv, London, Islamabad, and Tehran, new players emerged, new rivalries took shape. The old Cold War chessboard was gone. The world had entered a digital battlefield where lines between truth and deception blurred like never before. The tragedy of 9/11 forced intelligence services to see what pride once blinded them to. That information alone doesn't create foresight. Connection does. Human judgment. Cooperation. The courage to listen when it's inconvenient. Today, the CIA and its allies stand sharper, faster, and more connected than ever before. But deep inside every agency's training manual, one lesson remains highlighted in red. Never mistake information for understanding. Because that, not technology, not manpower, was what failed in 2001. And it's the lesson that drives every agent, every satellite, every line of code written in the war rooms of modern espionage. The story of 9/11's intelligence failure isn't just about the past. It's about the permanent reminder that power means nothing without perspective. And as new threats rise, cyber wars, artificial intelligence, proxy conflicts, one question still lingers in the silence of every secure briefing room. Did we truly learn from that day? Or just adapt to survive until the next one? This was the story of how the world's strongest intelligence network was caught unprepared, and how it rebuilt itself from the ashes. But in the shadows of that rebirth, new dangers are quietly forming. In the next chapter of history, will the watchers become the watched? Subscribe to Spy War, where the truth of espionage meets the art of storytelling. Each story, each file, each hidden operation uncovered one night at a time.